A report from Detroit says men are sitting in the parks all day long, out of work, muttering to themselves.
The jobless became the homeless.
These are the 30 Betty Crocker recipes that once fed America, then vanished. During the Great Depression and World War II, American kitchens turned scraps into staples. Betty Crocker led that charge. Today, we're uncovering 30 forgotten recipes that once fed a nation. Let's begin with one that used rice, inside meat. Porcupine meatballs. Ever eaten meatballs with spikes? It's 1942 in a small Minneapolis kitchen. The smell of bubbling tomato sauce fills the air, while a Betty Crocker cookbook lies open on the counter. There's no beef to waste, no rice to spare, yet this meal somehow manages both. With meat rationed and grocery lines long, these meatballs were a quiet miracle. You'd take 1 pound of ground beef, mix in uncooked white rice, a sprinkle of onion powder, salt, and pepper. Roll it tight, then drop those little balls into a hot skillet of tomato sauce and water. As they simmered, the rice would swell and poke out like little white needles. They looked like porcupines, but they tasted like comfort. The beef firmed up, the rice turned soft, and the tomato sauce wrapped around it all with that sweet-sour smell only canned sauce could give. A dish that cost mere pennies fed a full table. Kids didn't care about the name. They just knew it filled their plates and smelled like home. One wartime ad in 1944 promised these meatballs could stretch $1 until it screamed. And they weren't wrong. These weren't just frugal, they were clever. Picky eaters never knew they were eating rice, and mothers, who had nothing left in the fridge but a bit of meat and starch, called it their Thursday special. You can still find a version at a few retro diners like Mom's Table in Denver, only now it's rice-studded meatballs in smoky tomato gravy, and costs $14. Impossible taco pie. Ever eaten a taco where the crust made itself? It's 1971 in a sunlit kitchen in Des Moines. A mother of 3 is juggling homework, a crying baby, and dinner, all while trying to make something fun out of nothing. That's when she reaches for her red and white Betty Crocker box. Inside, a small card reads, "Impossible Taco Pie." The name alone feels like a dare, but the magic? It's real. This recipe didn't need tortillas or crust from a box. It made its own shell right there in the oven. You'd brown up a bit of ground beef with chopped onions and a pinch of taco seasoning, then layer it into a greased pie plate. Sprinkle on shredded cheddar, maybe a little diced tomato or green chili if you had it. Then the trick, a batter made from biscuit, eggs, and milk, poured right over the top. As it baked, something wild happened. The batter sank through the meat, settled on the bottom, and formed a golden, chewy crust all on its own. Kids thought it was magic. Parents called it a weeknight win. The smell of cheddar melting over taco meat, the puff of steam when it came out of the oven. This wasn't just dinner. It was fun. It was fast. And it felt just fancy enough to call a pie. In neighborhoods across America, this was the company's coming meal when you only had $5. One mom in 1973 wrote to Betty Crocker and called it the best trick since the washing machine. 7-layer casserole. Ever stacked dinner like a deck of cards? It's 1956 in a quiet Ohio suburb, and supper needs to be on the table by 6. No excuses. The fridge holds just a few bits and pieces, but Betty Crocker had a fix for that, the 7-layer casserole. This wasn't just food. It was order, thrift, and flavor all layered into one dish. The beauty was in the build. You didn't mix a thing. Just grabbed a deep casserole pan and started stacking right from the pantry shelf. First came a layer of uncooked white rice, then raw ground beef, crumbled and spread thin. Canned corn followed, then chopped onions, a sprinkle of salt and pepper, and maybe a few pinches of paprika if you wanted to feel fancy. Over that went a can of tomato sauce, smoothed out like frosting, then a whole layer of bacon strips, raw, smoky, and laid like a roof. Finally, Water poured gently down the side to moisten the rice. Covered with foil and baked low and slow, the smell was unbelievable. Smoky bacon, tangy tomato, and that sweet salty steam only canned corn could give off. As it cooked, the layers softened into each other. The rice puffed. The beef browned. The bacon crisped on top like a reward. You could slice it clean, like a savory lasagna without noodles. Chili cheese macaroni bake. Ever had dinner that tasted like a warm blanket? It's 1963 and the kitchen smells like cheese and chili, with a hint of laundry steam in the background. Mom's got a Betty Crocker card propped up next to the can opener. The recipe? Chili cheese macaroni bake. It sounds simple, because it is, but the taste, pure magic. You start by boiling elbow macaroni just until it's soft, but not mushy. Drain it fast, then mix in canned chili, beans and all, with shredded cheddar, a spoonful of ketchup, and a splash of milk. If you had a bit of chopped onion or green pepper left in the fridge, that went in too. Stir it all together, dump it into a casserole dish, and cover it with more cheese. The real joy came 20 minutes later, when the top bubbled and the edges crisped, just enough to stick to the spoon. It was soft, gooey, spicy, and salty in all the right ways. Kids cleaned their plates without being asked. One bite, and it felt like everything would be okay. This wasn't dinner. It was reassurance, the kind that stayed with you. One 1960s Betty Crocker leaflet called it a supper you can trust. Today, diners like Rusty Spoon Cafe in Missouri offer vintage chili mac and cheese for $13 a bowl. But back in '63, you made the whole dish for under $1. Turkey Devon. Ever baked broccoli and turkey into one creamy mountain? It's 1952 in a church basement kitchen, right after the Thanksgiving leftovers have been packed and passed around. The folding tables are lined with covered dishes, and near the center is one that always disappears first. Turkey Divan. Betty Crocker turned it from hotel fare into a middle-class miracle. It started with cooked turkey, usually leftover breast meat, cut into thick chunks. That got laid across a bed of steamed broccoli. Tender, green, a little squeaky when you chewed it. Then came the good stuff, a sauce made from condensed cream of chicken soup, a touch of mayo, a dash of lemon juice, and a pinch of curry powder if you dared. You'd pour it all over, then top it with shredded cheese and buttered breadcrumbs. Into the oven it went until it bubbled like a volcano of comfort. The smell of roasting turkey, cheddar, and broccoli filled the whole room. At bake sales, it was the first dish to run out. One 1953 write-up in a St. Paul newspaper called it the working woman's answer to French cooking. The sauce made everything stick together. The broccoli gave it bite, and the turkey turned into something new, creamy, warm, and far from dry. Today, some retro restaurants bring it back under names like mid-century poultry gratin at $17 a plate. But this dish came from scraps, not style. It fed 6 or 7 easily. Dilly bread. Ever baked a loaf that smelled like a sandwich before you sliced it? It's 1968 in a ranch house kitchen with yellow countertops and avocado appliances. A little girl stands barefoot on a chair, staring into a bowl that smells like her favorite deli. This is dilly bread. Betty Crocker's quiet sleeper hit. It wasn't sweet, it wasn't plain, it was pickled in the best way. The base was cottage cheese, warm to the touch, mixed with an egg, a bit of sugar, baking soda, flour, and dill seed. But here's the twist. Some home cooks used actual pickle juice to wake it up. The dough was thick and sticky, more like a batter than bread. You'd press it into a greased loaf pan, sprinkle it with salt, and let it puff just a little. Then came the oven, hot and waiting. As it baked, the top turned golden and cracked open like a grin. The smell was unreal. tangy, herby, savory, like a loaf that skipped the sandwich and went straight to the best part. You could tear off pieces and eat it warm with butter, or slice it thin and use it for egg salad. One housewife from Wisconsin once said in a letter, "This bread could charm the socks off a ham sandwich." Today, bakeries serve artisan dill loaves for $6 a slice. But back then, you made a whole pan for pennies, especially if you were smart enough to save that juice from your last jar of pickles. And when that loaf came out of the oven, the kids didn't ask what it was. They just grabbed it and ran. But the next surprise? Fiesta corn casserole. Ever baked a side dish that looked like a birthday party? It's 1959, and Mom's making supper in a pink-tiled kitchen with a wall phone that still has a cord. The fridge hums, the oven's warm, and there's one casserole that always makes the table look cheerful, even when dinner's just leftovers and hope. Fiesta corn casserole. Betty Crocker knew color mattered, especially when plates were half starch and low on meat. This dish started with canned corn, both whole kernel and creamed, stirred together with beaten eggs, a few tablespoons of flour, and a splash of milk. Into that went diced green pepper, chopped pimientos, and shredded cheddar cheese, yellow, red, green, and gold, all swirled together like a party in a bowl. You'd pour it into a greased baking dish, top it with crushed saltines or buttered breadcrumbs, and slide it into the oven. About 30 minutes later, the house smelled like Sunday. Warm, sweet corn, sharp cheddar, and a little hit of that green pepper bite. The top browned just enough to crack under your fork, while the inside stayed soft, creamy, and a little bit wobbly. Mock apple pie. Ever bitten into a pie and found out it was crackers? It's 1943, and there's not a single apple in the pantry. Sugar's scarce, butter's precious, but you still want dessert, and you still want dignity. That's when Betty Crocker pulled off the kind of trick only a desperate genius could invent. Mock apple pie. You'd start by rolling out a simple crust. Flour, shortening, cold water, nothing fancy. Then came the magic, a filling made entirely from broken-up Ritz crackers. That's right, flaky, buttery crackers layered like apple slices in a pie shell. You'd boil sugar, water, lemon juice, and a bit of cream of tartar, then pour the hot syrup over the crackers. A little cinnamon, maybe a dash of nutmeg. Then the top crust went on, crimped, sugared, and baked until golden brown. As it cooled, something miraculous happened. The crackers softened into layers that looked, chewed, and even tasted like cooked apples. No joke. One 1940s homemaker wrote in to say her husband never knew the difference, and he picked apples for a living. The texture fooled even picky kids, and the smell? Pure pie, warm spice, buttery crust, and steam rising in curls. Frosted sandwich loaf. Ever cut into a birthday cake and hit tuna salad? It's 1966, and the Ladies' Club is hosting a spring luncheon in the church basement. On the main table sits a tall, frosted rectangle trimmed in parsley. Someone whispers, "That's not dessert," and they're right. It's a frosted sandwich loaf. This was Betty Crocker's boldest move yet. Stack multiple layers of sandwich fillings, then frost the whole thing in whipped cream cheese like it's a party cake. You started by cutting crusts off white sandwich bread and layering 3 or 4 flat slices, spread edge to edge. Each layer got a different filling: ham salad, egg salad, pimiento cheese, maybe olive spread. You'd chill it, press it, then slather the outside with soft cream cheese, whipped with a touch of milk. Decorate it with olives, sliced radish, or parsley if you were really showing off. The final result looked like dessert, but one bite revealed pure deli counter. It was soft, cold, salty, and absolutely wild. Some called it elegant, others insane. One 1967 cookbook described it as a centerpiece and conversation starter in one, but when done right, it was delicious. Served in slices like cake, It shocked guests in a good way. You couldn't take your eyes off it. Today, retro dinner parties are bringing it back under names like Savory Layered Tea Loaf for $18 a serving. But the real version? It cost less than $1 to build and made jaws drop. And just when you think food can't get more playful, Betty hands you a knife and tells you to stuff cheese into a hot dog. Cheese-stuffed wieners. Ever turned 6 hot dogs into a family memory? It's 1951 and the fridge is running low. No steaks, no roasts, just a pack of wieners and a dream. That's when Betty Crocker offered up a fix so simple it almost felt like cheating. Cheese-stuffed wieners. You'd grab each hot dog and slice it lengthwise, just enough to open it like a book without cutting all the way through. Then, into that crevice went a slice of American cheese, bright yellow, perfectly square, folded to fit. Some families added relish or mustard, others skipped it. Then you'd place the stuffed dogs on a baking sheet, dot them with butter, and slide them under the broiler or into a hot oven. As they baked, the cheese bubbled up and spilled over like molten gold, curling the edges of the hot dogs until they browned and twisted. The smell? Unmistakable. Salty, smoky, sharp. Served with tater tots, sandwich bread, or whatever was left. It was fast food from your own kitchen. Kids went wild. Parents smiled quietly, pretending it was all planned. One 1952 promotional flyer called it the 10-minute miracle. And that's exactly what it was. Today, diners dress it up as cheddar-filled Angus links for $11 a plate, but the OG version, you could feed 4 for less than 50 cents. It wasn't gourmet. It was good. And just when you think Betty's hit the end of her wild streak, she puts bologna in the oven and turns it into a breakfast cup. Cottage cheese and pineapple mold. Ever eaten something that made your fork hesitate, but then made you smile? It's 1957 in Toledo, Ohio, and Mrs. June Eckhart is preparing for her Bridge Club's Friday luncheon. Her table's already set with pastel plates and cloth napkins. In the center of every plate is a perfect wobble, her signature cottage cheese and pineapple mold. This wasn't just salad, it was mid-century hospitality in edible form. You'd start with a packet of lemon gelatin, mixed with boiling water until clear. Then came the surprise. Cold cottage cheese, crushed pineapple with its syrup, a dash of mayo, and a spoonful of chopped celery. Stir it gently, pour it into a ring mold, and chill for hours until it's set into a glossy, pale yellow wheel. Served on a bed of iceberg with a dab of Miracle Whip, it jiggled like dessert, but tasted like something in between. Tangy, sweet, cool. It made you raise an eyebrow, then reach for seconds. Neighbors raved. One 1958 Betty Crocker promo said, "It's salad, it's snack, it's sunshine on a plate." It was the dish that proved you were hosting with flair. These days, retro brunch spots like Jell-O and Vine in Portland serve a similar mold for $10 a slice. Ironically, of course. Golden Glow salad. Ever scooped up a bite of sunshine that shimmered like glass? It's 1960, and in a sun-drenched Los Angeles kitchen, Mrs. Perez is placing tiny glass cups into the fridge, each one filled with a bright orange mixture that almost looks radioactive. Her daughters giggle at the glow. It's Golden Glow salad, and it's about to steal the show at Sunday dinner. This salad didn't whisper. It sang. You'd start with orange gelatin, dissolved and stirred until smooth. Then came grated carrots, finely shredded, just enough to keep their crunch. Crushed pineapple added tang and syrupy weight, and sometimes a splash of lemon juice gave it an extra zing. Once mixed, it was poured into molds, individual or one big one, and chilled until it quivered just right. The result? A salad that looked like a sunset and jiggled like jelly. It didn't try to blend in. It demanded attention. Some folks added nuts. Others folded in raisins or a dollop of sour cream. Served on lettuce with a curl of mayonnaise, it was part appetizer, part palate cleanser, part cold comfort. Kids thought it was dessert until they tasted the carrots, but adults knew better. This was how you made vegetables fun. One 1962 community cookbook from Bakersfield praised it as a bright note on any buffet. Today, gourmet catering menus list spiced citrus carrot gelée for $11 a portion. But this dish came from penny stretchers and creativity. Back then, a full mold cost under $1 and fed a dozen. The glow wasn't just visual, it was emotional, a sign that someone cared enough to try. But if orange carrots in Jell-O wasn't bold enough, wait until you see what Betty did with green gelatin, canned pears, and a touch of lime that made guests lean in, then look twice. Pear and lime Jell-O salad. Ever tasted something that made you question reality, and then take another bite? It's 1974 in Charleston, West Virginia. Miss Opal, the neighborhood babysitter and Sunday school teacher, is setting the last dish on the church potluck table. Nestled in a crystal bowl, wobbling with pride, is her signature pear and lime Jell-O salad. No one knows quite what to expect, but they all want a slice. You started with lime gelatin, bright, bold, and very green. Once it dissolved in hot water, you'd mix in a spoonful of softened cream cheese or cottage cheese for body, then gently fold in diced canned pears and a splash of their syrup. Some versions added chopped pecans or a few drops of lemon juice. You poured it into a mold, sometimes ring-shaped, and chilled it until it set with a smooth, creamy wobble. Served on lettuce with a cherry on top, it looked like something from outer space. The flavor? Oddly perfect. Sweet, tart, a little creamy, and just enough crunch from the pears to keep it grounded. People laughed at first, then went quiet. One elderly guest in 75 said, "It's strange, but it's strangely good." That became the dish's legacy. Miss Opal swore by it. "They tease it till they taste it," she'd wink. Modern bistros now sell lime pear aspics in fancy glasses for $9 a cup, but this salad cost barely 60 cents and made you look like you tried. It fed 8 to 10 easily, and if it didn't all get eaten, kids poked it with forks just for fun. But don't blink yet, because what Betty whipped up next wasn't molded, baked, or cooked at all. It was a ring of cold-cut bologna, curled into a cup and holding scrambled eggs like a diner trick gone wild. Salmon noodle ring. Ever seen a dinner shaped like a tire and filled with fish? It's 1954 in a split-level home in Milwaukee. Mrs. Denise Halberg is ironing blouses while something unusual bakes quietly in the oven. Her youngest son peeks through the oven window, puzzled. What he sees is pink, shiny, and molded like a bundt cake. It's the salmon noodle ring. This dish wasn't just a meal, it was a statement. You'd start by cooking egg noodles until just tender, then mix them with flaked canned salmon, chopped celery, diced onion, a beaten egg, and a bit of milk. Sometimes a spoonful of mayonnaise. You'd season it lightly, maybe with dill or paprika if you had some. Then came the trick. You'd press the mixture into a ring mold, greased and waiting. Into the oven it went, baked until golden at the edges, firm enough to hold its shape. Once out, you'd unmold it onto a serving plate and fill the center with creamed peas or a mound of parsley. The outside was golden and crusty, the inside soft, savory, and shockingly satisfying. It looked odd, but it tasted comforting. One 1955 homemaking magazine wrote, "The salmon noodle ring makes thrift beautiful." Guests raised eyebrows, then asked for seconds. The canned salmon brought ocean depth, while the noodles gave it warmth. Today, upscale cafes serve seafood noodle terrines for $15 a slice. But this whole ring once cost $1.10 and fed a family of 5 with leftovers. Creamed salmon in patty shells. Ever eaten something that felt like room service, except you were in your own kitchen? It's 1961 in Albany, New York. The weather's gray, the radio's playing Sinatra, and dinner needs to feel like more than just a Tuesday. That's when Mrs. Lenora Kent pulls out her Betty Crocker binder and turns to a page she's dog-eared twice. Creamed salmon in patty shells. This was the kind of dish you made when you wanted to impress without spending a dime more. You'd start by draining canned salmon, flaking it gently with a fork. Then, in a saucepan, you'd make a simple white sauce, melted butter, flour, milk, stirring until smooth. Into that went the salmon, a bit of chopped onion, maybe some peas or diced red pepper if you were dressing it up. Season it with salt, pepper, and a whisper of lemon juice. Meanwhile, frozen patty shells baked in the oven, light, flaky, and hollowed just enough to cradle the filling. When everything was hot and ready, you spooned the creamy salmon into each shell, watching it spill out just slightly. Garnished with parsley or paprika, they looked fancy, restaurant fancy. Lenora's husband once joked it was the fanciest fish this side of payday. The richness of the sauce, the briny salmon, and the buttery puff shell hit all the right notes. It felt luxurious, even if it started from a can. Today, similar dishes show up on cruise ships as salmon vol au vent for $22 a plate. But this version, under $1, start to finish. It fed four and made them feel like guests. And just when you think Betty's hit peak elegance, she brings it all back down to earth with a casserole that takes everything you love about cabbage rolls and makes them easy enough for a Tuesday night. Cabbage roll casserole. Ever loved the idea of cabbage rolls, but never wanted to roll a thing? It's 1972 in a Detroit duplex, and the smell drifting through the stairwell is unmistakable. Sweet cabbage, stewed tomato, a hint of garlic. Upstairs, the Doyle family is gathered around a casserole dish that's just come bubbling out of the oven. It's cabbage roll casserole, and it's changing the game. This was Betty Crocker at her most practical, taking an old-world classic and reshaping it for a busy American kitchen. You'd start by browning ground beef with chopped onions in a skillet. Meanwhile, a head of cabbage got chopped. Not rolled, not boiled, just roughly cut into bite-sized pieces. In a greased casserole dish, you layered the raw cabbage, the beef mixture, cooked white rice, and a generous pour of tomato sauce. Sometimes a bit of Worcestershire went in, or a sprinkle of garlic powder for depth. Then more cabbage, more sauce, and into the oven it went. After about an hour, the top crisped at the edges, while the inside turned soft and silky. Every bite was familiar, like your grandma's kitchen, only easier. No toothpicks, no steam burns, just hearty, tangy, slightly sweet comfort. One 1973 homemaker wrote to Betty saying, "It's the lazy girl's cabbage roll, and I'm not turning back." Today, Eastern European cafes offer deconstructed golubki for $17 a bowl, but back then, you fed 6 for under $1.50. Bologna cups with scrambled eggs. Ever eaten breakfast out of a meat bowl? It's 1970 in a kitchen with shag carpeting and an avocado-colored fridge. The morning sun's barely up, but the sizzle from the oven wakes the whole house. Inside, 6 curled-up slices of bologna, each one holding a mound of fluffy scrambled eggs like they're serving brunch in a spaceship. This was Betty Crocker doing what she did best, turning the ordinary into something just odd enough to work. You'd start with thin-sliced bologna, laid gently into muffin tins. As they baked, the edges would curl upward, forming cups like little brown-edged flowers. While they crisped, you scrambled eggs in a pan with butter, milk, salt, and pepper, fluffy, golden, and soft. Then, just before the bologna turned too stiff, you'd spoon the eggs inside and top with shredded cheddar or a slice of American cheese. Back into the oven for a minute or two, just enough to melt the top and bring it all together. They came out smelling like Sunday diner breakfast, smoky, eggy, toasty. Kids loved the look, dads loved the protein, moms loved that it didn't dirty 5 pans. One 1971 Betty Crocker newsletter called it the breakfast you could eat with your hands. These days, brunch spots call them breakfast meat cups and charge $11 for a set of 3. But back then, you made a dozen for under $1. They were fast, fun, and surprisingly elegant when lined up on a tray. And while the bologna crisped just right, the eggs stayed soft inside. It was breakfast with a twist, and people remembered it. But if you think breakfast served in meat cups was Betty's wildest food illusion, wait until you taste a pie that swore it had apples. Ritz Cracker Mock Apple Pie. Ever tasted apple pie that never met an apple? It's 1945 in a Pittsburgh row house, and rationing is in full swing. Flour's precious, sugar's limited, and fresh apples, forget it. But dessert still matters. So Grandma Mabel turns to page 42 of her tattered Betty Crocker cookbook and bakes the impossible. Ritz Cracker Mock Apple Pie. The crust is homemade or store-bought, doesn't matter. The magic is in the filling. You'd take buttery Ritz crackers, yes, crackers, and break them into rough pieces, layering them in the shell just like sliced apples. Then, in a saucepan, you'd boil sugar, water, lemon juice, and a bit of cream of tartar until it made a syrup. Pour it over the crackers. Add a sprinkle of cinnamon and maybe a dash of nutmeg. Then cover with another crust. Crimp, vent, and bake until golden. The house fills with the smell of warm spice and flaky pastry. When you slice in, you see layers that look exactly like softened apples, translucent, golden, tender. The taste? Startlingly accurate, slightly tart, buttery, with just enough crunch from the edges of the crust. One newspaper ad from the 40s called it the greatest kitchen trick of the war, and it was. Some families kept making it long after apples returned because it was cheap, fast, and surprisingly delicious. Today, food historians revive it at vintage pie contests where it's still a crowd pleaser. A slice goes for $6.50 at the Ration Kitchen in Brooklyn. Back then, the whole pie cost under 75 cents. But what really sold it was the reaction. Every first bite came with a pause, a blink, and the same question. Wait, there's no apples? But if you think using crackers for pie was the limit of Betty's dessert boldness, just wait until she rolls mashed potatoes in cocoa powder and dares to call them candy. Party potato fudge balls. Ever been tricked into eating mashed potatoes? At a birthday party? It's 1958 in Peoria, Illinois. A dozen kids are crowded around the table, party hats tilted, paper plates in hand. On the platter, perfect brown fudge balls rolled in crushed nuts and cocoa powder. They look like truffles. They smell like chocolate. But one mom in the back is watching the faces, waiting, because what she brought weren't made of chocolate at all. They were party potato fudge balls, and Betty Crocker swore they'd fool even your most sugar-hungry guests. It started with cold leftover mashed potatoes, smooth, creamy, nothing fancy. Into that, you stirred in powdered sugar, melted butter, cocoa powder, vanilla, and a pinch of salt. The texture turned thick, like cookie dough. Then you rolled the mix into small balls and coated each one in chopped walnuts, coconut, or more cocoa. No baking, no chilling, just mix, roll, and serve. The taste? Surprisingly rich. Soft in the middle, just sweet enough, with a cocoa finish that made you forget where it all began. One 1959 community cookbook said, "They'll never guess, and you don't have to tell." Moms made them for bake sales, birthdays, even church potlucks, and they always disappeared. Today, vegan bloggers resurrect the recipe as root-based chocolate truffles for $9 a dozen. But back then, you made 3 dozen for under $1, especially if you had leftover potatoes from Sunday's roast. Betty knew how to stretch ingredients and stretch belief. These fudge balls weren't just candy, they were confidence wrapped in cocoa. And just when you think dessert couldn't get any more daring, Betty brings out a sandwich that's cut like cake, frosted like dessert, and stuffed with layers no one saw coming. Broiled grapefruit with cherry. Ever eaten fruit that came out of the oven with a cherry on top? It's 1965 in Jacksonville, Florida. The air smells like sea salt and Aquanet, and every kitchen in the cul-de-sac seems to be experimenting with something new. On this particular morning, Mrs. Colleen Brower is doing something strange before church, broiling grapefruit, not juicing it, not slicing it, broiling it. And not just any grapefruit. These are halved, scored, sprinkled with brown sugar, and topped with a bright red maraschino cherry dead center. It was part breakfast, part performance. Betty Crocker jumped on this mid-century health trend that collided head-on with America's sweet tooth. You'd start by slicing a grapefruit in half and loosening the segments with a knife. Then sprinkle the exposed fruit with brown sugar, a pinch of cinnamon, and in some cases a few tiny dots of butter. Some folks even added a splash of rum. Pop it under the broiler until the top bubbled and browned, and suddenly your breakfast looked like something from a hotel brunch. Warm, sweet, tangy, and faintly caramelized. The cherry? It wasn't about flavor, it was the exclamation point. One 1966 promo called it the grapefruit that winks back. It smelled like citrus candy and steam. Kids were skeptical. Adults pretended to like it more than they did. "It's interesting," Uncle Ray once muttered, before finishing it out of guilt. These days, wellness cafes serve caramelized ruby citrus brulee for $8 a half. Back then, you got 6 grapefruits for $1 and fed a table full of guests with what felt like glamour. Mrs. Brower used to say, it was breakfast pretending to be dessert, but not fooling anyone. Still, it added ceremony to the morning. And just when you think food can't get cheekier, Betty makes a hot dog hide inside toast and wink at you from the plate. Wiener winks. Ever been winked at by a hot dog? It's 1953 in Topeka, Kansas. Saturday lunch is on the way, and little Jimmy is laughing at what just came out of the oven. His mom sets down a tray of golden brown triangles, each one shaped like an eye with a hot dog peeking through. "They're called Wiener Winks," she says, straight-faced. And somehow, that makes it even funnier. This was Betty Crocker's whimsical twist on Pigs in a Blanket, but sharper, toastier, and more theatrical. You started with slices of sandwich bread, white and square, crusts trimmed off. Each slice got flattened with a rolling pin and brushed with melted butter or margarine. Then came the magic. You placed a whole hot dog diagonally across the bread, rolled it tight like a cigar, and secured the ends with toothpicks. Into the oven it went. As it baked, the corners lifted slightly, the dog browned, and the whole thing crisped to a golden crunch. The wink came from the ends of the hot dog poking out, just enough to look playful. One 1955 Homemaker's column described it as the appetizer that smiles back. The taste, salty, crunchy, buttery, and unmistakably kid-friendly. You could dip it in ketchup or mustard, serve it at birthday parties, or line it up on a platter for a 50s bridge club and call it retro chic. They were cheap, easy, and weirdly delightful. Mrs. Jenkins, who lived 3 doors down, used to say, it's the kind of thing only Betty could dream up and only kids would cheer for. Today, gastropubs offer buttered Frank roll-ups for $10 a plate, pretending they invented it. But in '53, you fed a room for less than $1 and made people laugh. Just like with cheese-stuffed wieners, Betty knew that sometimes you didn't need a meal, you needed a smile. But just when you think the humble hot dog's run its course, she turns it into royalty by standing them upright in a casserole like they're wearing crowns. Hot dog crown casserole. Ever seen dinner arranged like it was about to get knighted? It's 1959 in San Diego, and 10-year-old Richie bursts into the kitchen yelling, "Mom, it's like a castle!" What he's looking at is the hot dog crown casserole, a dish that combined economy, spectacle, and just the right amount of absurdity. Betty Crocker didn't just feed people. she entertained them. This dish began with a base of creamy mashed potatoes or seasoned ground beef, pressed into a casserole dish like a savory canvas. Then came the stars, hot dogs, each one sliced halfway up the middle to create legs, then stood upright all around the edge of the dish like sentinels. As it baked, the hot dogs curled slightly, forming a circle that looked half regal, half ridiculous. The center was usually filled with something comforting, macaroni and cheese, baked beans, or creamed corn. When the casserole came out, it looked like a crown. A funny one, yes, but still a crown. The aroma, hot dogs, starch, butter, and whatever filling had bubbled up just enough to spill over. It was rich, salty, a little smoky, and somehow fun. One 1960 write-up in the San Diego Weekly Shopper called it dinner with a standing ovation. Moms loved it because it was cheap and cheered up. Kids loved it because it was ridiculous. And dads loved it because, well, it was hot dogs and mashed potatoes. How could you go wrong? Today, modern comfort food bistros play with the concept, serving Frankfurter Pillars over rustic mash for $14. But the original fed 6 for $1.35 and made the table fall silent right before they burst into laughter. It brought theater to Tuesday. It made food fun again. And it reminded you, like the salmon noodle ring or the frosted sandwich loaf before it, that Betty Crocker didn't just write recipes, she wrote moments. Hot dog macaroni crown. Ever crowned dinner twice in 1 week? It's 1962 in Omaha, Nebraska, and Mrs. Ruth Maloney is staring down the stove, trying to figure out how to make Thursday dinner feel less like leftovers and more like an event. She opens her Betty Crocker box, flips past the usual suspects, and lands on something familiar. But this time it's been taken to the next level, the hot dog macaroni crown. It's the showy cousin of the hot dog crown casserole, but with double starch, double structure, and double the fun. This version starts with cooked elbow macaroni tossed in butter, shredded cheddar cheese, a splash of evaporated milk, and a few spoons of ketchup. Yes, ketchup. The mixture gets pressed into a greased ring mold or bundt pan and left to set slightly while the oven heats. Then come the hot dogs, sliced halfway, fanned just like the original crown, and carefully arranged around the edge of the mold so they'll stand up straight as soldiers. When it bakes, the macaroni firms up into a golden halo, the hot dogs puff and curl, and the aroma is something right out of a county fair food tent, smoky, cheesy, and a little bit sweet. When unmolded, the result is dramatic. The macaroni holds its shape like a throne. The hot dogs rise like a coronation line. Kids would cheer, moms would beam, and dads, tired from work and just happy to be fed, would say, "Well, that's a new one, hun." Mrs. Maloney used to joke, "It's like macaroni and cheese got elected mayor." Some versions added peas or chopped pickles to the center for flair. Others filled it with beans or sauerkraut, and more than once, little Richie from next door called it Macaroni Volcano. Today, you'd find this at a retro supper club as Frankfurter Mac'n Crown, plated for $16 with microgreens and a drizzle of aioli. But in 1962, you made it for under $1.25, and it made the dining table feel like a holiday. It wasn't just dinner. It was entertainment. It was the kind of dish that gave the cook a moment of applause before anyone even took a bite. Baked Spam and pineapple slices. Ever had meat that came in a can and wore a fruit hat? It's 1955 in Honolulu, Hawaii, just 2 years before statehood, and Mrs. Kameko Matsuda is preparing Sunday lunch for her extended family. Though Betty Crocker wasn't born in the islands, her cookbook made it there by boat and by base. And among the pages is a dish that feels oddly local, strangely elegant, and unmistakably mid-century. Baked Spam and pineapple slices. The process is oddly beautiful. You begin by slicing a can of Spam into thick pink slabs, each one firm, salty, and shining like polished ham. Then you lay the slices into a baking dish and press a round pineapple ring onto each one. Some cooks secure them with toothpicks. Others let the juice do the work. Then comes a brown sugar glaze, just a spoonful mixed with the pineapple syrup and a dash of dry mustard, poured over the top like lacquer. Slide it into the oven. About halfway through, the smell fills the house. It's sweet, smoky, tangy. The Spam caramelizes on the edges. The pineapple softens and glistens. It's dinner that smells like a luau and tastes like a school cafeteria romance. One 1956 review in the Honolulu Advertiser called it the meeting of GI thrift and tropical joy. Some folks scoffed at the idea. Others swore by it. Spam was our steak, Mrs. Matsuda used to say, serving it with white rice and bok choy. It didn't matter if you were feeding 5 or 15, Spam was shelf-stable, endlessly available, and perfectly salty for a sweet pairing. Some families even added maraschino cherries to the center of the pineapple for a color pop. Others layered slices of onion underneath to balance the sweetness. Served hot, it was sticky, soft, and deeply nostalgic. Served cold the next day, it was just as good. Peanut butter bacon canapes. Ever had a party bite that made you stop mid-sentence? It's 1967 in Atlanta, Georgia. The Bridge Club is meeting at Mrs. Lucille Gibbons' house, and she's decided to go rogue. Instead of cucumber sandwiches or deviled eggs, her silver tray holds something that looks like dessert, smells like breakfast, and turns into a full-on flavor grenade in your mouth. Peanut butter bacon canapes. The name alone drew nervous glances, but the taste? Well, that's where things got weird. This dish wasn't written for the faint of heart or palate. It started with tiny cocktail toasts, lightly buttered and broiled just until crisp. Onto each one went a spread of creamy peanut butter, smoothed into the edges like icing. Then came the shock. Crumbled, freshly cooked bacon scattered generously over the top. Some versions added a touch of honey, others layered thin banana slices or a dusting of paprika, but Lucille's secret, a dab of hot sauce under the peanut butter. It woke the whole mouth up, she'd say. It was a bite that crossed lines. Sweet, salty, fatty, spicy. Kids would grab one thinking it was candy, then flinch at the savory twist. Adults would frown, chew, then often nod and reach for another. It's strange, one guest muttered, but it works. The balance of fat and salt made it addictive. The crunch of the toast, the melt of the peanut butter, the crisp snap of bacon, every texture hit at once. Betty Crocker called them conversation starters, and they lived up to the name. They weren't just canapes, they were culinary truth or dare, and when paired with martinis or a Tom Collins, they became oddly elegant. Today, high-end catering calls it smoky nut crostini and charges $18 a plate. Lucille never apologized. It was the 60s. Rules didn't apply to food either, she'd laugh, and by the end of the night, the platter was empty. Canned peach whipped dessert. Ever eaten something so light it barely felt real, but made you crave more the second it was gone? It's 1951 in a modest bungalow just outside Cincinnati. The linoleum floor is clean, the curtains are open, and the oven is off. Why? Because tonight's dessert doesn't need heat. It needs a can opener, a mixing bowl, and a little bit of blind faith. It's called canned peach whipped dessert, and it's what Betty Crocker offered when families needed sweetness, speed, and softness all in one. You'd start with a can of cling peaches, syrupy, tender, pale orange like sunset in a bowl. Drain them, mash them, and fold them gently into a mix of whipped evaporated milk and lemon gelatin. The gelatin had to be just starting to set, wobbly, cold, and thick like honey in January. Into that went sugar, a touch of vanilla, and sometimes crushed graham crackers or marshmallows, depending on how far you wanted to lean into the fantasy. Whip it all together until it puffed up into something halfway between a mousse and a cloud. Chill it, serve it, watch people smile. One 1952 housewife wrote to Betty's test kitchen and said, "My kids call it orange fog. I call it a miracle. It was soft, sweet, slightly tangy, and weirdly satisfying. You didn't chew it so much as let it melt. The flavor was delicate, fruit-forward, not too sweet, and just creamy enough to feel indulgent. Some moms served it in punch glasses with whipped cream on top. Others spread it into graham cracker crusts and called it peach icebox pie. And some, like Mrs. Crandall across the street, froze it into little scoops and served it like ice cream. Today, modern retro bakeries in Portland or Austin sell Peach Chiffon Dream in glass ramekins for $12 each. But back in 1951, you made a whole pan for 65 cents, especially if you'd chilled your evaporated milk the night before, like the cookbook said. The real magic was how it felt, light but rich, fast but thoughtful, a dessert that felt like love on a tired weekday night. Even the skeptics, dads who preferred pie or kids looking for chocolate, took a spoonful and nodded. It wasn't complicated, but it hit the spot. And just when you think dessert couldn't get any fluffier, Betty pulls a twist that makes people pause mid-bite. A shortcake topped not with fruit, but with green beans. Green bean shortcake. Ever eaten a dessert that made you question everything, then go back for seconds? It's 1964 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The church picnic is wrapping up. Plates are being cleared. Someone's aunt brings out a tray of shortcake, tall golden biscuits, split and stacked. But what's in the middle isn't strawberries. It's green beans, dressed with butter, topped with a dollop of sour cream or white sauce. This isn't dessert. It isn't dinner. It's something entirely different. It's green bean shortcake. And yes, it really existed. This was one of Betty Crocker's strangest curveballs, part of a 1960s trend of flipping sweet into savory and back again. It started with a biscuit base, flour, baking powder, lard, or shortening, baked until golden, split in half like a strawberry shortcake. But instead of syrupy fruit, you'd pile on lightly sautéed green beans, tender but not mushy, then spoon over a creamy mushroom or sour cream sauce. Some added shredded cheddar. Others included crumbled bacon or crispy onions. The top half of the biscuit went back on like a crown, and the whole thing was served warm. The result? Confusing, comforting, and yes, surprisingly good. The biscuit absorbed the sauce, the green beans added snap and sweetness, and the whole dish danced between dinner and dessert. Apricot gelatin ring with chicken salad. Ever sliced into a glowing orange jelly mold and hit poultry? It's 1958 in a suburb of Chicago, and Mrs. Madeline Graves is preparing for the ladies' auxiliary luncheon. She's ironed the napkins, polished the flatware, and chilled her pièce de résistance overnight. It's the dish that made neighbors whisper, guests hesitate, and husbands quietly reach for seconds. It's the one, the only, apricot gelatin ring with chicken salad. The process reads like alchemy. You start by dissolving apricot-flavored gelatin in boiling water. Once it's partially cooled, but not yet set, you mix in diced celery, shredded carrots, and chopped walnuts. Some versions added crushed pineapple. Then, carefully, you pour this mixture into a ring mold. The color is electric orange. The consistency? Slick, glassy, and vaguely futuristic. Chill it overnight until it's firm as a drum. Then, right before serving, unmold it onto a platter and fill the center with a heaping scoop of creamy chicken salad, complete with mayo, chopped egg, and sometimes green grapes. The visual? Shocking. A glowing orange halo encircling a mountain of meat. The taste? Depends on who you ask. Some loved the cold, sweet fruit bite against the salty salad. Others took one look and passed. One guest in 1959 famously quipped, "I don't know if I should eat it or hang it on the wall." But those who tried it often couldn't stop. The balance of crunch, chill, sweetness, and savory pulled you in bite after bite. It wasn't a dish. It was a dare. It was elegance with a wink. It was post-war culinary theater. Madeline used to joke, "It looks like dessert, eats like dinner, and confuses everyone at the table." It wasn't meant for picky eaters. It was for women who clipped coupons, read Better Homes and Gardens, and knew how to stretch a chicken and a conversation. Watergate salad. Ever tasted something that sounded like a scandal, but felt like childhood? It's 1976 in Dayton, Ohio, just months after the Watergate hearings had finally ended. The headlines are fading, but the jokes are not. And at a family barbecue that 4th of July, Aunt Dottie walks in with a bowl that wobbles like a promise and glows like mint ice cream. "I brought Watergate salad," she says with a wink. And the unspoken punchline: everyone already knows what's inside, and no one's brave enough to ask why it works. This isn't salad. It's dessert. It's fluff. It's nostalgia in a bowl. And it starts with one of the most curious combos in culinary history: pistachio pudding mix and crushed pineapple, canned in syrup, not juice. You stir those together until they form a thick, sweet green base. Then come the mini marshmallows, dozens of them, along with whipped topping and chopped pecans. Some people fold in coconut. Others swear by maraschino cherries or a splash of lime juice. The result is a pastel green cloud, cool, creamy, nutty, and just tart enough to keep you coming back. No one really knows why it was named after Watergate. Some say it started as a joke. Others think it was a riff on Watergate cake, another dish with questionable origins and suspiciously sweet layers. What we do know is this: Watergate salad stuck. It showed up at funerals, cookouts, baby showers, and holiday buffets, and everyone had an aunt, a neighbor, or a church friend who swore theirs was the best. It didn't try to be fancy. It tried to be fun. One 1977 community cookbook described it as suspiciously good. Another simply called it green stuff, and that's how most people remember it, as the green stuff that sat next to the ham at Easter and got eaten faster than the rolls. Coca-Cola salad. Ever poured soda into gelatin and called it salad? It's 1963 in Shreveport, Louisiana, and Miss Arlene Booker is stirring something carbonated into a mixing bowl with the determination of a woman who's fed 5 kids on $5 a week. Her sister peeks over and asks, "You makin' punch?" Arlene grins. "Nope, salad." She tips the can forward, and out comes Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola salad, or cola congealed salad, as it appeared in some Southern cookbooks, was a dish so strange, so sweet, and so Southern that it practically needed a drawl just to explain it. The base was black cherry or strawberry gelatin dissolved in hot water like usual. But instead of cold water to cool it down, you'd pour in a full can of Coca-Cola. The carbonation would hiss and foam, but the result? A glistening dark ruby mold that jiggled like a drum and tasted like candy. But wait, it doesn't stop there. Into this fizzy mix went crushed pineapple, drained, chopped pecans, and, here's the kicker, maraschino cherries. Some bold cooks even added cream cheese dollops or a swirl of sour cream down the middle. Once chilled and set, the mold was sliced like cake and served on a lettuce leaf or alongside baked ham. It was part soda, part fruit, part fantasy. The texture was bouncy, smooth, and had little bursts of crunch from the nuts. The flavor? Sweet, slightly tangy, and unmistakably cola. One church bulletin from 1964 called it a miracle of modern food chemistry. Another called it a dare you'll say yes to. Kids loved it. Adults were puzzled, but no one forgot it. Miss Arlene used to bring it to every potluck, always chilled in her Tupperware mold shaped like a flower. "It looks like sin and tastes like Sunday," she'd say with a wink. And when asked why she made it, she'd answer honestly, "Because I can." Today, Coca-Cola salad appears in irony-driven cookbooks, retro throwback menus, and vintage cooking YouTube videos with millions of views. Some chefs top it with whipped mascarpone, others turn it into a frozen bomb. But none of them beat the original, bubbly, jiggly, strange, and perfect, because Coca-Cola salad wasn't just a dish. It was a mood, a rebellion, a dessert that dared to use soda pop, gelatin, and canned fruit to create something no one saw coming, and somehow still loved. We've reached the end of the table, but somehow it feels like we've just sat down. 30 forgotten Betty Crocker recipes. 30 dishes that once fed families, turned heads, and stretched nickels into meals. They weren't perfect. Some were downright strange, but they carried something with them, something heavier than flour or canned fruit. They carried stories, ingenuity, survival, love. These recipes were never about showing off. They were about showing up, every night with whatever you had for the people you loved. A few hot dogs, a can of pineapple, half a box of crackers, and suddenly you had dinner. Not gourmet, not Instagram-worthy, just good enough to make someone smile, fill a plate, and make it to the next day. And isn't that what mattered most? Betty Crocker didn't just teach America how to cook. She taught us how to make do, how to laugh when the Jell-O slid sideways, how to smile when the cheese bubbled over, how to celebrate Tuesday like it was Sunday. So here's to the molded salads, the mystery meats, the peanut butter canapes, and the dreams built on biscuit. They weren't just recipes. They were resilience. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we brought a few of them back.